Let me start the recording. Happy evening, everyone. I hope all of you are doing fantastic. I'm sure you have done the homework and exercise given by Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty. Welcome back. That today's webinar will be based on research problem identification and validation. Like in the business, if you are finding the right location, off of your business is already taken care of it. When it comes to the research is concerned, identifying the research problem is basically like equivalent to completing 50% of your research. So this topic is very essential to arrive at findings which is going to have great implications for the stakeholders directly or indirectly. So with this note, let me request Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty to commence your session on research problem identification and validation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Sudhakar sir. So I hope that earlier session that we had yesterday, it was more sort of philosophy, and so I understand that it would have been a little bit boring, if I have to be honest. But today's topic is something which is very much practical in nature and which relates directly to your research thesis. So as sir said, so if you have selected a good problem, your research or your thesis is half done. Now here in this webinar as such, I'll be talking mostly with reference to the presentation that this presentation would be made mostly with reference to the PhD thesis and not with reference to the paper. So what is the difference between that paper and thesis? So basically the time frame and the amount of work or effort that goes into the research paper is different, and for a PhD thesis it is very much different. So please note this thing, that this is related to much more related to a PhD thesis. At the end of the seminar, if we have at the end of the webinar, if we have some of the time left, then we will be discussing the aspects of research problems with respect to the papers as well. So with that, let us begin the presentation. So as you would have noticed, then yesterday also I started with one of the quotes. Today also I am starting with one of the quotes. So you can see that Mark McConney, who was considered as one of the very landmarking researcher in the field of marketing, he said, just because a problem has been identified, it does not mean that there is now plenty of data to analyze. Now this quote kindly sums up all the parts of the presentation, all the other parts of the presentation for today. Now, and I will be speaking more sort of the things that I have faced during my PhD, and so today there will be a little bit longer session with respect to the audience interaction, because everybody's problem differs from one to the other. So with that, we will go to the next slide, which is about what is a research problem. So normally speaking, a research problem is a phenomenon. Okay, so phenomenon is something that in the qualitative research, you do not call it a research problem. Rather than that, you call it a phenomenon. Because yesterday only we discussed that your ontological standpoint is that reality can be interpreted, or reality can be, reality can be negotiated. So in the case of qualitative research, if you are doing a qualitative research, it is not called as a research problem rather than a phenomenon. However, in the quantitative research doctrine, we call it as a research problem. Is the topic you would like to address, investigate, or study, whether descriptively or experimentally. Now, so basically it is telling that it is something that you are trying to investigate into and address while you are doing while you are taking a descriptive approach or an experimentative approach. So in the descriptive approach, as we have discussed yesterday, that it is much more sort of a qualitative paradigm, whereas in the experimental approach, it is more sort of a quantitative paradigm. Now, it is the focus or reason for engaging in your research. So many of the time, while there is a question, so this is one of the things that you will face very oftenly, if you have not registered for PhD, or if you have recently joined for PhD, many of the times people will be asking you, what is the reason you started doing your PhD? So, or even in your interviews, they will be asking that what is the reason you engaged in your PhD? So this is the place where you have to tell that the research problem, and you have to passionately tell about the problem. So if a researcher is not passionate about a research problem, he or she will, I mean, it is something that indicates that he or she will not prosper in the thesis writing and all. So becoming passionate about the problem is one of the most highlighting aspects that you have to see. Now, it is typically a topic or phenomenon that we discussed before, or challenge, okay, that you are interested in and with which you are at least somewhat familiar. Now, something or the source of research problem. So basically, this line tells us that the source of the research problem should be something personal, okay, something you are interested in, or it is like a challenge that you want to face or you want to solve. It is like a puzzle that you want to solve. Now, in day-to-day life also, we come across many of the problems, but all problems cannot be research problems, okay. So there has to be many of the criteria that we will be discussing in the next slides, but it is something that you should be very much passionate about. So we will see what are the different characteristics that of a research problem should be. First and first and foremost, the primary criteria for a research problem should be to be clear and concise. Okay. Now, many of the times when in the interview or in the panel discussion or in the DC committee meeting, you will be asked that describe your research problem. Now, I would quote Einstein's, Einstein's words, that he says that if you cannot explain your answer, or if you cannot explain the problem to a 6-year-old, then it is not a problem probably. Okay. So if you are you as a researcher you are not comfortable in explaining what the research problem is, you will not succeed in the next phases. So one of the first things that you have to have is that you have to very succinctly, so very concisely, you have to tell what is the problem. So I'll give you one of the examples of a good problem and a bad problem in terms of clear and concise data. So one of the problems can be, so to solve, so there is a problem or outbreak of COVID-19 in all across the world. Now, one of the good problems, or one of the good statement of problem can be to investigate the impact of COVID-19 on the socioeconomic condition of artisans in a particular village. Now here you see the problem is so much concise that you are studying nothing but the impact, okay, impact of COVID-19 on a particular community of people residing in a particular village. So you can see that here the problem is a very clear and it is a very concise problem. So apart from the clarity, there has to be conciseness. Conciseness means in a very short, briefly period, you have to, in a very brief statement, you can tell it. Now, when many of the researchers are asked that what problem are you, what problem are you working on? Now, some of the researchers say that many of the times I see researchers telling that I am doing research on poverty. Okay, so my problem is poverty. Poverty is a very good problem, but the problem is poverty is not concise. Okay, poverty is rather a very broad concept. Okay, so you have to very clearly say that which aspect of poverty you are studying, whether it is inequality, whether it is deprivation, whether it is freedom to choose. So all these theories, there are different theories of poverty, and you have to very clearly say that what is the theory that you are studying about poverty. Now it can be, so this is one of the examples of a bad research problem, that to study, when I ask many of our tourism scholars, they say that I want to study about sustainable tourism. Now sustainable tourism, if you know, then it has 17 agendas. Now which agenda are you talking about? So everything has to be very clearly noted down and concisely put in the first place. So that is the first criteria. Second criteria, that every research problem should lead to a research question. So every time a researcher should be asking themselves that, so what? So what? Okay. So there is a problem of COVID-19 outbreak. So what? Okay. So COVID-19 outbreak is a very broad problem. It won't lead to a research question. Your question should not look like an objective. Okay. Many of the time when people are asked about research question, they say that their question is like sort of a statement. So the question should not be a statement. Rather than that, there should be a proper question mark. So from a research problem, it should lead to a research question. So if there is problem of COVID-19, it leads to the problem of the study of. So the research question would be, what is the implication of COVID-19 on the socio-economic condition of so-and-so artisan in so-and-so village? Okay, so now this leads to a proper question. So if it does not lead to a proper question, probably it is not a good problem. Okay, so what? You have to always ask, so what? Another thing is that all the problems should be grounded in theory. As we discussed yesterday, that many of the times in the desire to become a very, or in the desire to contribute a lot to the society, sometimes we forget that some of the theories are needed to study a particular problem. So if there is no theoretical background to support your problem, so you are starting from scratch, and no research starts from scratch. Research, as such, the word is research. Okay, it's not search, it's research. So there has to be some of the theories, either interdisciplinary theories, either it should be in some other discipline. You are bringing the theory to the place, or you have to you have to refer to the existing theory. So if you see Butler's all the good theories in tourism research, Butler's life cycle model is inspired from the product life cycle model. So it has to be a good theory that it is grounded in. Doing explorative research, so exploratory research, as you know, it is a research in which existing theories are not available in plenty. So doing exploratory research for your PhD thesis can lead you to very harmful consequences in the later stages. I have, in my personal experience, I had my friend who did research on a very exploratory study, but later on he found out that there is no particular kind of data, and people were also not able to suggest him that what is the way out. So after 3 years he had to change the topic, and this is not the one case. I have seen many of the cases which is happening because of the research problem. Now it should have implication and importance. Now please note that every research, one of the objectives is to solve the problem of the society. So it should be something which is of importance to the society, and it should have implication value. Okay, so even though it is implied, I mean, it is being used somewhere or not, that is a different thing. So it may be so that, as we discussed yesterday, that many of the PhD research thesis gets the dust in the library of some central university or state university. But that's not the case. That's not the point. Point is, you have to make your research something which is, which can be applied to some of the problems. So you can see that one problem which has been there for a long period of time, and you as a researcher is providing some of the implications and importance. Now, most important for me is the time bound. Okay, so PhD research thesis is a very time bound process. It requires you to finish your PhD in a period of, like, let's say 5 years. So UGC provides fellowship for 5 years. If it is university fellowship, then 4 years. So it is a very time bound process. They ask you to be time bound. So so many of the time people do what, that once they get into PhD, they think that, okay, after my course work, I will decide that how to go about. But that sometimes lead to a very a very difficult situation in which the researcher at the last moment is hustling just to get the write the thesis at all. So it has to be very time bound process. And time bound, when I say time bound, it means that you should have a particular kind of deadline. and you have to work on that deadline. So every research problem should be time bound. So you cannot say that even though you are an astrophysicist, you cannot say that I will do research on the movement of Mars across the period of time, because that will take a longer period of time. In the case of sustainable tourism, you cannot say that I will do a longitudinal study for the problems of a particular community over a period of 10 years, let's say, because there is no time for 10 years. So it has to be very time bound process. You cannot study the whole of augmented reality and how it has helped the tourism, because when you are doing that, you have to base some of the aspects of theory. Okay, so you can work on, so you cannot work on augmented theory because it's a augmented reality. It is a very huge theory. But what you can do is you can see that the implication of augmented theory in the tourism marketing, so that you can with particular reference to so and so company, so that you can do data availability. Even though it is time bound, it is grounded in theory, but you see there is no data. Suppose and this is a very big problem for we Indians, because our data sources are not as equipped like Europeans or Americans as such. So data availability is one of the things that you have to see in the beginning itself, not to dive into the data, but to know that at least basic amount of data. Now let's see, I will give you one of the best examples. That one of my friends, again, she was doing research on the so she was doing research on a very indigenous community. Now the problem with this indigenous community is that their panchayats also do not have their data. So she had to suffer a lot because of that problem of data unavailability. So for everything, so there is a no clear map about the village. Now she has to make the village map, which is a very time taking process. Wealth map, it is not there. So when basic amount of data is not available, a research problem will lead you to a faulty research question. So please check that whether a research problem has plenty of amount of data that it is pertaining to. Should not have adequately studied. Okay, so all these things, when I am saying, you must be thinking that, so sir is telling or this guy is telling you to study something which is already studied. Yes, you have to study something which is already studied, but mind you that you have to study something which is already studied, but that aspect has not been studied before. I'll give you an example. So basically, the implications of let's say sustainable livelihood theory has been studied in the case of agriculture. Okay, sustainable livelihood studies is a very landmarking study in the field of agriculture, but that particular theory has not been implied in the case of tourism mostly. So you can study livelihood of a particular community or an individual household through that sustainable livelihood framework. So I saw that this is a very good opportunity, that in Indian context it has not been used, or Indian context it not has been studied. For that matter, one of the best things that I like about Indian tourism research or Indian research as such is that many of the problems are not studied. It's a very new field. It's a very it's a field which is in its very niche studies. For people in economics, since you will have some of the people who are in economics and all, you have to very minutely go back and study the literature and find out that where is the problem lying. Must watch, so it's must match the researcher's interest, that we have already discussed, so I will not tell it more. This is another important point, that must not lead to any ethical jeopardy. Now you know that suppose I give you an example of sex tourism. Okay, so now you know that sex tourism is an aspect which already may have been studied, but it has a lot of ethical implications in the context of developing country like India. So people are not very much open about talking about the aspect of sex at all. So it will lead you to a ethical jeopardy in the later stages. So it is better to avoid them for the PhD topic, because it can have consequences which is not in your control. So that must be avoided. Must have focus. Okay, and focus is something that I have already told, that there should be a clear milestone that what you have to achieve and how you have to achieve it. So focus is must. Now, having told all these things, one will be definitely asking me that then where to find this research problem. So what are the sources of these research problems? Okay. So these are the sources that I thought are very much important for, for the new age researcher. Apart from that, there may be some of the other sources, but this is what from my personal experience, I also found out that this is the way how we find out a good research problem. So first and foremost, so uh, there is a question that was asked to Prabhat Patnaik, who is known as one of the biggest risk economists in and currently he's working in JNU. And so one of the things that was asked to him is that how does one become a good researcher? So he answered that one becomes a good researcher when he or she becomes a good reader. Okay. So existing theory is something that should be your base of the research, because as I discussed in the last slide, that it should be grounded in the theory. Now, in order to know a good research problem, you have to go back to the theory. Now, suppose I'll give you an example. Now, you are studying the problem of, let's say in tourism, you are studying the problem of over tourism at Nandi Hills, let's say. Now, so Nandi Hills is a place which is near to Bangalore. So there, in the weekends, so many number of people go to that same place, and there are, like different implications which are termed as over tourism. Now, you are studying the problem of over tourism at Nandi Hills. So now, if you cannot relate to the existing theories of over tourism, you cannot solve the problem of Nandi Hills. So even though Nandi Hills is something that has not been studied before, but it has to be, linked to the theories of over tourism as such. Okay. So theory, getting grounded in the theory is one of the most important things in a research problem. Okay. So next thing is personal experiences. So in the same example, in the case of Nandi Hills, I as a tourist have visited Nandi Hills, like 2-3 times. So every time I go there, I see that 20 minutes, 30 minutes a car just to cross just to cross distance of 100 meters. A car will stop there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Okay. So if a person gets out of the car and walks also, they will reach faster. So that's the problem that I saw. So many cars, so many people, so many like problems at the place of Nandi Hills. Now this becomes a personal experience. So I click a picture of this problem in Nandi Hills, and I started doing research and started writing, like a particular aspect of over tourism. Let's say traffic management of over tourism. Okay. Or somebody can do research in infrastructural development. How should the infrastructures be developed so that the problem of over tourism can be solved? So it should be based on personal experiences, and that is what we call it as empirical study. Empirics is nothing. Empirical word comes from the word empirics, and empirics is nothing but your personal experiences, right? Then comes the interdisciplinary perspective. This is one of the most important aspect for the people in which whose discipline is already overstudied. Okay, so some of the disciplines like commerce, or some of the disciplines like economics, they in their field, so many of the things are overstudied. They will not find many of the aspects that has not been studied. So for them, the best way to approach is to look for the problems on any other disciplines. Okay. So let's say in the case of tourism, sustainable tourism, let's say, have been studied a lot, but tourist psyche as such has not been studied so much. Or let's say solo female traveler psyche has not been studied so much. So that becomes a interdisciplinary, and psyche is something, or psychological scale, or something which is relating to the psychology rather than the basic tourism field. So for the people who have already done whose field in which in whose field a lot of research has already been done, they have to look for an interdisciplinary approach. One of the best examples is the behavioral economics that is becoming a thing of future. Then interviews as such. So I need not discuss that. That you have to interview some of the people and to know that whether that problem that you are studying is pertaining for a. I mean, whether the people or the community who are deciding at the particular place, whether they are also having the problem or not. Then government databases. So every year, Ministry of Tourism publishes some of the reports about like uh, tourism statistics. Now every year, Indian Statistical Institute also provides many of the publishes many of the secondary data. NSSO data set also many of the people will be they can actually access those kind of databases and find very minute problems and verify the problems with those documents. Then comes expert opinion. So somebody who has already done, so research is something that you should always learn from others mistakes. So many of the experts would have done a lot of mistakes, or many of the experts would have left something in between. So you can ask those experts that which aspect do you think has current relevance, and I want to do research for a PhD thesis or a paper. You have to properly mention that what type of scale or what type of relevance the topic has or the problem has. So experts can very well guide you. My personal favorite is peer discussion, because I generally do not see peer discussion happening in many of the institutes, but wherever I have seen good research, I have seen good peer discussions. So once in a while, let's say once in once in a week or once in a fortnight, there should be a research. This is one of the practices that we had in Pondicherry, and we are still continuing it here in Garden City also, that peer discussion happens. So peer discussion means people who are in your same this one. The problem with expert is the problem of time. Experts do not provide you a lot of time, but peers are the best sources, and peers are very much straightforward to you. So they can, if you have a friend who is a researcher, they will be very easily they can very easily tell you that, "Oh, I see this problem in one thing." But in other critics, you will not find the people who will be so like so well can provide you the opinion. So that can be a very good research problem. So I will finish with this today, because I think the validation aspect we will be discussing tomorrow, because I think we should discuss some of the questions more. So audience question more. But this is the flow that you have to follow while you are going through the process of research finding, or sorry, while you are going through the process of your writing your research thesis. So first thing comes research problems, and you can actually by heart it also. So this is one of the things that you have to by heart, that your research problem should lead you to your research questions. So as I said, a good problem leads you to a good questions. So this is the foundational building block of a very good research. So every problem should lead you to a good question. A good question will lead you to a good objective or objectives. Every good objective will lead you to good conceptual or working hypothesis. And when you then, after choosing the hypothesis, if you have a good hypothesis in your hand, you just have to go for a good methodology choice, which is done through literature review. And methodology directs you towards the methods. Okay, so based on your methodology, you go towards the methods. So problems will lead you to the questions. Questions will lead you to the objectives. Objectives will lead you to the hypothesis. Depending on the hypothesis, you will choose your methodology, and depending on your methodology, you will choose the methods. If you follow this practice, and if you are very much clear about, go back. So this is the assignment for today. I hope that you people are doing the assignment. So if you are doing the research like this, then you will be very much successful in your research. So if you have a clear diagram of like this, then there is nothing can stop you in becoming a good researcher. So there are a few more slides, but I think we would stop with this, because this is also a lot important. We would take the audience question for today, sir.
Those who have any questions, thank you very much for a great presentation. Those who have any questions, you can feel free to ask now. Please unmute your mic. Audience, participants, if you have any questions, you can unmute your mic and ask. Ms. Vasumati, you had a question. You can kindly ask Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty. Ms. Vasumati, Ms. R. Vasumati.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Ms. Neha.
Yes, my question is this. I'm Latisha Ramanayaka from Sri Lanka, and my question is this. Now, if there are for a research we have only one or two research questions.
Right.
What if we have more than two, or I mean like four research questions? Do you think it has more effect or more valuable or more lasting effect? Please, could you please explain it to me?
Yes, it's a very nice question, because we generally see that generally in a PhD thesis there are more than 4 research hypotheses, and that's what I think you are asking. And for that, the my response would be like this. So basically, the problem that you are choosing can lead you to a theory, and that theory can then be divided into some of the aspects. I will give you an example for that, by which you can better understand. Now I wanted to study the livelihood of a particular community, artisan community at Raghurajpur. So that was my main problem. So main problem is there has not been any studies. Okay, so it is leading to the question that what is the livelihood structure of a particular community at a destination. Okay, now now I went back and searched the theory about sustainable livelihoods. So I found out a theory called DFID, which is the Department for International Development Sustainable Livelihood Theory. Now, in that livelihood theory, there were many of the other concepts like capital, livelihood capital, livelihood vulnerability, and livelihood, outcomes. Now, capitals will be influenced by the vulnerability, and if there are less vulnerability, outcomes will be better. So here I got three questions. Sorry, I got three objectives, if you can see, to study the. So I am basically studying the livelihood, but at the same time, my my follow-up is that to study the livelihood capitals of so and so artisan community, to study the vulnerabilities that this community has, and to study the outcomes and to evaluate the outcomes. So this would be the approach in which same theory, but many of the aspect of the same theory you are studying as a PhD topic. So there will be a broader question or broader problem, and this broader problem will be solved through a broader theory, which will be then divided into some of the smaller theories. So that has to be that is what we call it as a conceptual map of your research. So your conceptual map, if you are making your conceptual map, it should very clearly relate to that this problem. And so any problem should not be studied as an isolated topic, rather it should be studied as a part of the system. So sustainable livelihood is the system, livelihood capital is the part of that system. So I think that answers your question, that everything should be studied as a systems approach rather than an isolated approach. So you cannot say that I will study livelihood, but at the same time I will study the problem of women empowerment. I saw a lot of prospective studies about women empowerment there, but that's not my objective, or that's not my problem. Okay, there may be a lot of women related problems. So all the questions should pertain to a particular theory which is considered as a system. So I hope you got some idea regarding your question, ma'am.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I think having more research questions will allow me to will allow me to go through the very specific details. Am I correct?
Exactly.
Yes. So that is better to have more than one research question. That
Obviously,
is where.
so every question, so there has to be a broader question. These broader question has to be then divided into some of the smaller questions based on the aspects of that broader theory. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so very much, dear sir, for your
Thank you.
excellent clarification.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there more questions from other participants?
Good evening, sir.
Yes,
Happy
Neha
evening.
ma'am.
Sir, apart from peer discussion and expert group and other types of idea generation, can we also go through some journals or articles to finalize the topic or to frame the topic, sir?
Obviously,
Since
that's
I'm
what
in the
I.
starting stage of the research, I would like to. I've not yet finalized the topic, so I would like to know your ideas on that, sir.
Sure. So actually, when I mentioned the theory, so that theory, by theory, I wanted to mean the literature. So literature should be your base about any of the research problem. So I will give you an example. So a few days back, one of the scholars met me while I was in a conference, and he asked me that I am studying the problem of adventure tourism at this one at Himachal Pradesh. Now, notice this, that the problem of adventure, it's not a problem as such. The problem is if there is any problem in the adventure tourism activity. So, if there is security issues at adventure tourism place, so you have to basically see that what is the problem and then go to the literature. So, you saw that there is no particular kind of security regulations that is being adopted at the adventure tourism sites of Himachal Pradesh. Now you saw that okay, there should be some of the guidelines that has to be followed. Now you will go back and you will see that in adventure tourism, New Zealand is the place where most of the tourism activity, adventure tourism happens at New Zealand. So what are the security guidelines at New Zealand they follow, and what implications? So everything that New Zealand follows, we cannot follow it here. So we have to start from a different perspective. But that idea, that guideline or that book has to be there. So any kind of literature, not just journals, I would not say only journals, any kind of reports. So if you can see that I told about government reports also, I told about personal experiences also, but everything has to be validated through literature. What you very correctly pointed out, that you see a problem personally, you go back to the literature, study the theory, then develop a question. So generally, when in the beginning somebody asks you in the just when you are starting the, so you will see that in the beginning nobody asks you that what is your research question. They ask you to do a coursework. That coursework is to familiarize you with the thing that you are studying. Okay. So after your coursework only, that while you are submitting your synopsis, that synopsis defense is as such that you are telling the person or you are telling the evaluator that I have a very good problem and I have studied that thing in the theory. Now I want to study it in the practical or in my experience. So it has to be a very clear process, and everything has to be a personal experience, then literature, or if you found something in literature itself, then you can also go with that. But literature is something that you very well said, that it has to be the base. It should be grounded in theories. Yes. So I hope that answered your question, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Are there more questions from the participants? Mr. Priyanshu, Priya Krishna Mohanty, I'd like to ask you one question. Most of the times when we are planning to conduct a research, two things which needs to be kept in mind. One is whether the information which is required to resolve a particular problem is available or not available. In case if it's not available, then there is a need for research, or whether the information which is already available but not meeting to resolve the problem more effectively. Then again, it calls for a need for a research. So what's your
Okay.
take on these two approaches usually followed, whether the
Okay.
research is required or not required?
Okay. So as I said it before, that for a PhD topic, first you have to go through the data, and after seeing the data, if you find that there is some problem that has not been studied, you can go for a you can go to study the problem, because it's a period, I mean it's a study that will take 5 years long, 5 long years or 4 long years. Now that is the main objective of PhD thesis. But if you are studying something related to a research like exploratory research. So somebody has to do the exploratory research also. Not every researcher has to do the descriptive research or let's say empirical research. So the thing that you said about when data is not available, it becomes an exploratory research. So that takes a considerably long period of time. Suppose you want to study the problem of transgenders in the doctrine of tourism. So you will not find that many number of good theories in the doctrine of tourism studies. Still, people do research on transgenders in the field of tourism. So that will require a longer period of time. So for PhD thing, you can take a topic which is rooted in data, which has ample amount of data, and your job is to fill that smaller void that it is there. But for exploratory research finding, once you get your PhD, you are on your own, so you can devote your time on studying something that has not been studied and on which data is not available as such. So
Great,
that would
great. Are there any questions from other participants?
Sir, I would like to ask a question. Sir, you had mentioned that we need not there is a broader question we take and then we break it out into smaller questions and then we do it. For example, I'm taking a research problem with 2-3 questions, but after going into the research, I find a few things are the cascading problems of the research which I'm going to do. Can I add it to my research, or will it be, because sometimes the methodology might slightly vary for the cascading problems? Can I add it to my research, or should I do it in a different way, like complete one research and then take that as a pilot research and do it? Or can I add it to my current research, which would be much more productive than doing it in a separate way?
Very good question. So this is something that I had also faced during my PhD time, that while I was studying the livelihood of particular artisan community, I found that women are also getting neglected. So the aspect of, so women were doing a lot of activity in their household. So in the work, in their work of producing that artist, when the artists are producing these things, women are helping. But in terms of recognition or in terms of monetary value, nothing, women are not getting anything. So I, as a researcher, was very much fascinated enough to do that gender equality, so gender empowerment thing. But while I presented the same idea as an objective, so as you said, it is a cascading study. You never thought that it will come to your notice, but you will find that in notice. So in my humble opinion, my answer would be to neglect that objective for your research thesis. You neglect it for your research thesis, so you ignore it for your research thesis, but carry on your study for your PDF or for the later stages. That will help you, because see, that is what I got the response from my guide, that he said, so if you are going to study the problem of women empowerment, you have to change your methodology as such. Now I was going through, I was implying a qualitative methodology. Now empowerment is something on which different scales are already available. So I had to go for another quantitative, scale. Now what it will do is it will lengthen your questionnaire. So you have to now, to collect questionnaire so you have to collect data for 2 questionnaires, which will again lengthen your process of data analysis. So 2 questionnaire, 2 analysis, and 2-way writing. That will also take out the focus from your PhD thesis. So if you are having a cascading problem that you faced during your term of PhD, I would suggest that for the time being in your PhD thesis, you ignore it and continue it after your PhD. So now I am doing research after submitting my thesis. I am again going back to the place and I will again do the research on the women, impact of women empowerment, or the aspect of women empowerment at the particular place. So did that answer your question, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Clearly. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any more questions? We are nearing the end of the webinar. The last question which I'd like to ask you would be, what should be the maximum time a respondent should take to participate in any kind of a survey or any kind of a study? Because if you look at human beings, their attention span and also their a self-interest to participate in the survey tends to be very lower, especially in the Indian context is concerned. If there are going to be more number of research questions, I'm sure there are going to be more number of the items which needs to be measured to examine the phenomenon. So what's your recommendation?
So in very brief, it completely depends on what type of approach that you are applying. So if you are taking a grounded theory approach, then your time spent should not be, should be more, obviously, because you have to be a participatory research. So that is called as participatory research. So you have to, rather than just going and asking the person questions, you have to spend some time with the person, familiarize yourself, and then only when, if he is agreeing, then if he or she is agreeing, then only you can ask the question. But if you are going for a quantitative questionnaire, it should not be more than 15 minutes, because 15 minutes, I generally see that with the 15 minutes is the max that a person can give you. And you have to understand that you are not making a service to the person by taking their opinion. For you, he is just an he or she is just an like respondent. But for them, that 15 minutes matter more. So please keep this thing in your mind while you are going for a quantitative analysis. Not more than 15 minutes. Nobody likes to be bothered for more than 15 minutes while they are filling up a questionnaire. So in that aspect, you can limit your questions. A general phenomenon, as a in marketing theories, in general phenomenon, we try to limit the questions within 50, not more than 50, and that too all should be tick boxes. There should not be any objective questions, subjective questions. So that will be my opinion, sir.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. With this, we are concluding the webinar on research problem identification and validation. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you, Mr. Priya Krishna Mohanty.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.